Today on Inside Utah Politics, education funding. Utah voters approving Amendment G to make some changes to the income tax earmark. We're checking in with the amendment sponsor for more on how it works and where it goes from here. Plus, a bipartisan group of lawmakers coming together in the nation's capital to end the stalemate over a COVID relief bill, what their plan entails and how they plan to get it through.
Time now for Inside Utah Politics.
Thanks for joining us. I'm Glenn Mills. It is time to go inside Utah politics. We do begin today with State Senator Dan McKay. He sponsored the bill to put Amendment G on the ballot. Senator, thanks for being here with us. We appreciate it.
Good to see you again.
Let's go back. We'll get into some of the numbers and where we move from now in just a bit. But let's go back and set this up. How did we get to the point where you were sponsoring a bill to put Amendment G on the ballot?
Well, I'm a state senator, and you have to be a state senator to sponsor a bill. Do you want
we
to
don't
go
need
back that far?
No, we don't need like the Bill 101 kind of stuff.
Okay, good. I knew you didn't. So, you know, what you have seen from the legislature over the last, probably I'd say the last 5 years, is a public education effort where we have actively been trying to figure out how do we deal with a exponential growth in income tax, because we've had a positive growth in new jobs and things like that in the state of Utah. And yet our other funds that are used to, and then all that education, all that money from income tax goes into education only. And then all of our funds that are used to pay for the rest of the state budget were lagging behind. And so, you know, how do you continue to deal with that budget imbalance? And there were lots of ways to deal with it. We looked at, you know, we saw at the very beginning of 2019, we passed a major tax reform. And the voters, you know, a lot of people didn't like it. And so they put together a referendum on the legislature, which is very uncommon. The last one was the voucher bill. And that really kind of put things in motion for Amendment G. I ran it during the 2019 session at the same time that we were looking at the earlier versions of tax reform.
Right.
And everybody thought, well, that's one way to do it, but we'd rather go this other route. And after that failed, everybody came back and said, well, maybe Amendment G idea would be the way to go, and that's how we got there.
This is always a big topic here in the state of Utah. It can be heated at times as well. A lot of people think that we're not putting enough money into the education system. There was a group that came together to the compromise table, if you will, surrounding Amendment G. Talk about who all was involved in that.
Well, you have every major education you know, interest that was really working with the state. And this is really, I mean, while I was the sponsor of the Amendment G platform, you really had a lot of leadership come out of Senator Ann Milner up in Ogden, a lot of leadership come out of the House with Representative Mike Schultz, and truly their efforts to meet with everybody and try to find ways to build a bridge and accomplish some major things that education community was really looking for. And
so real quick though, yeah. Senator, you mentioned lawmakers that were involved, but talk about those in the education field. Okay,
sorry. Yeah, so you have the Utah Education Association, you have Education First, you have the PTA. I mean, those three major groups alone, getting them to the table and really trying to figure out what they needed from the future of the budget so that they felt secure enough to support changes to Amendment G. And that's why I say hats off to legislative leadership for putting together a package that really got their support.
Okay, let's talk about Amendment G, what it does. Define Amendment G for us.
Okay, so if you read Amendment G, it's possible really to kind of miss the nuance of it. Right now, education funding is limited, income tax collection is only limited to be spent on education. So if we bring in $1 billion in funding, that education has to be spent in education. And it ignored really, you know, that education is becoming much more to every student from a funding perspective. And so what we found ourselves doing was we looked at, well, maybe there are ways that we can narrowly open up the funding to be allowed for children and for people with special needs and handicaps and those kinds of things. Sorry, the language jumps out of my head right as we're talking. But it really allows us to spend, you know, income tax revenue on the whole student and acknowledging that, you know, from mental health services and those kinds of things that can be provided at the school level. And it also provides us the budget flexibility to provide long-term funding for student growth and for inflation.
Okay, so one of the criticisms was, okay, if you're going to take it from there, where do you get more for education? And one of the big concerns was in economic downturn, in a downturn, which at the time of the legislative session, we didn't really see what was coming necessarily.
Well,
We're in hard economic times right now. So how do you make up for that funding gap there?
Great question. We talked about inflation, and we also talked about so inflationary growth in the WPU. We also talked about not having to worry about funding student growth or student population growth. So those two parts of it are taken care of in House Bill 357. But a third component, really the third leg of the stool to shore up education funding, is the creation of a rainy day fund specifically for education during downturns to make sure that those specific items, i.e. inflationary growth and student growth, are for sure covered. And so in some ways, in the past, though there has been no growth in education funding during downturns, and we've seen loss or even stagnation really in that fund during the times we're in a downturn, this creation of the rainy day fund, that if the funding continues as it is this last year, that even during the COVID time, we would see 2 or 3 years before this fund could really make sure that student growth and inflationary spending would always be covered in education. And that was really, that fund, together with those other measures, is really what brought the education community to the table.
So are you certain that your colleagues up on the Hill and the governor will continue to put the type of focus on education funding that we have seen in the last few years? Well, as far as new money coming in.
Yeah, and I appreciate that question, because I think I hope the public recognizes and everyone recognizes that at the legislature, we have always funded. If you look at education as a percentage of our expenditures in the state, it has always been number one at the state level. And the second part of that is, when you look at our education spending as a percentage of our budget, we are always in the top 5 in the country for our spending a percentage of our budget on education. And I guess everybody says, well, we're still low on the WPU number. I understand that. But recognize the legislative priority is always to cover and make sure that we provide for the future, which is our education system.
So the bill, or the amendment passed by about 9 percentage points. It was one of 7 amendments on the ballot. That was the one I was kind of watching closely. At first, it's unusual to see amendments pass the way they did this year. But were you surprised at all by the percentage of the vote that this one passed by?
I wasn't surprised. I felt like Amendment G would pass, and I feel like the real reason it passed is because of the leadership of Representative Schultz and Senator Milner up north. And their efforts in working with the Utah Education Association, the PTA, and other education groups to really drive a compromise. I mean, when you see those groups put out a positive note, it was amazing. I'd heard from some of my more conservative-led constituents saying, wait a minute, I don't understand this. Why would they support this? And walking them through what they get and versus what they're giving up, it's going to be a good deal for Utah, and it will continue to be a good deal for Utah's future.
Okay, you alluded to this, but we do still sit in that dubious position of last in the nation when it comes to per pupil spending. Do you see us coming out of that anytime soon?
Well, we're really hoping that Idaho stops funding its students altogether, and that would really help bump us up to 49. I say that in jest, and I really probably shouldn't, but I think the hard part is we have a lot of kids in the state of Utah, and it is one of the reasons Utah's economic future is so bright. And having a lot of kids on a per capita basis makes us have to be spend thrifty and be smart about our education dollars. And I'm really grateful for our local superintendents and board members who keep it that way.
All right, Senator, we have run out of time. We appreciate your time on this Sunday to help walk us through this. Thanks so much for being here. Still to come, can Congress come to an agreement on a COVID relief bill? What should it include? Our panel will weigh in on that a little bit later. But first, the committee charged with deciding who gets the COVID vaccine first, meeting virtually during the week. Reaction from that meeting after the break. As we draw closer to the end of the year, the clock is ticking for Congress to pass another COVID relief bill. Utah Senator Mitt Romney is part of a group of Senate Democrats and Republicans coming together for a plan to get aid out before Christmas. Washington correspondent Basil John reports on this bipartisan plan.
Our action to provide emergency relief is needed now more than ever before.
West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin joined Senate Democrats and Republicans to announce a new framework for COVID relief.
The people need to know that we are not going to leave until we get something accomplished.
The almost $1 trillion plan would provide aid to American students, families, businesses, workers, and healthcare providers. Virginia Senator Mark Warner says lawmakers need to act.
It would be stupidity on steroids if Congress left for Christmas without doing an interim package as a bridge.
Louisiana Republican Bill Cassidy says the proposal requires compromise from both sides.
Republicans and Democrats, neither of us got everything we wanted. Both of us got much of what we wanted.
The plan does not include direct payments to Americans, but provides funding to areas lawmakers say the pandemic is hitting the hardest.
This is going to get us through the most difficult times.
Even with bipartisan support, lawmakers like Senator Mitt Romney recognize the next step will be getting support from leadership on both sides.
I don't have any prediction on how the White House would react. We've also communicated with the Majority Leader's office about what we're working on, but neither has described whether they would support or not support what we've put together.
But with relief programs set to expire at the end of the month, members of Congress say something must be done now. Reporting in Washington, I'm Basil John.
A 14-member advisory panel voting Tuesday on who should get the COVID-19 vaccine first. Washington, D.C. correspondent Anna Warnicki reports on the decision.
Dr. Kathleen Dooling, a member of the committee advising the CDC, says the first doses will go to healthcare personnel and long-term care facility residents.
Essential workers who do not work in healthcare in Phase 1B, and adults with high-risk medical conditions and adults who are 65 and older in Phase 1C.
The decision comes just days before FDA advisors are scheduled to discuss the emergency approval of the vaccines made by Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna. Dr. Sarah Oliver, another advisor on the committee, says the plan is to start distributing the shots within 24 hours of that approval.
We expect a constrained supply environment for some months and need to make the best use of available vaccine.
Ultimately, the states will decide who gets the vaccine first, but the vote today will help the governors make those choices and start setting up the process for administering shots. Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar says 40 million doses of the vaccine will be available by the end of the year, enough to vaccinate 20 million Americans.
That won't all be available at the same time, however. We anticipate 5 to 10 million doses per week post-authorization.
The CDC says states have until Friday to submit their orders for vaccines. That gives federal officials time to evaluate their plans ahead of the expected FDA approval on December 10th. In Washington, I'm Anna Warnicki.
Still ahead, elections officials in Georgia say the president is inciting violence with false claims of fraud. Our panel weighs in on that after the break.
You're watching Inside Utah Politics.
Time now to debate some of the big stories of the week with the Inside Utah Politics panel. This week we have State Representative Corey Malloy and former Salt Lake City Councilman Charlie Luke. Gentlemen, glad to have you with us. Thanks for being here.
Great to be here.
Let's start off with COVID stimulus. We saw a bipartisan group come out during the week, which included Utah Senator Mitt Romney, coming together saying, look, we need to get something through. This plan they put together doesn't include everything the Democrats want, not everything the Republicans want, but they're making the pitch. It has some of what we both want. Charlie, let's start with you. Is this an approach that they can get through?
I don't know if they're going to be able to get it through, but they need to get it through. Right now, when you look economically across the country, there is a very serious need right now for additional stimulus because of the way that COVID has ravaged the economy. And you know, when you look at money that needs to go to local governments, that needs to go to students and families and businesses, those are all really important areas, and those are the groups that are struggling right now. So I would hope that the Senate will be able to pull themselves together and move forward, and that the President would then sign this. The way that this is coming about is in a very bipartisan way, which is nice to see. But we just need to make sure that that the Senate's encouraged to pass this.
Mm-hmm. All right, we'll get more into that in just a minute. But Representative, let's bring you in. Is this an approach you think they can be successful with?
Well, I think it's to be seen. My understanding is that there's a white paper going around. There's an idea. The beginning is of a plan, but there's no legislation. So we need to get it to the point where there's legislation that can actually be discussed, debated, and potentially passed. But what I think is really important is the fact that whatever stimulus that comes out needs to be really focused on business and the people. We shouldn't be spending money to bail out states or cities, but focus on the people and really target those funds to where it will help the best.
I think everyone agrees on the need. There doesn't seem to be any disagreement there. So why is it that they have not been able to come together at this point, Charlie, to make some kind of deal happen?
Really? Politics. I mean, look at where we are right now as a country. I mean, you know, we've had an election that you know, the president won't accept the results from yet, and this is very, very problematic. But it symbolizes where we are. That's really, you know, I think the difficulty right now. This is something that shouldn't be hard. It should not be difficult to move this proposal forward, but it is because of the political environment that we're currently in.
Your thoughts on that, Corey?
I think it shouldn't be difficult. It should be fairly easy, but what we need is a Congress that really focuses in on the people and what the needs of the people are, instead of all this bickering and total focus on getting rid of Trump. But you know, everybody's been through an election. We're still going through the election and finalizing the election, and what we need is a Congress and a Senate to get back to work and really focus in on what's best for the people.
Okay, you already mentioned this in your first response, Representative, but there is a portion of this bipartisan idea, if you will, to send some money in the tune of billions for state and local governments to use. You oppose that?
It really depends on how it comes out. As long as it's focused on helping the people and deregulating the things that could get in the way of, like, getting the virus here into the state, that would be, I think, be acceptable. But
so when you talk about helping the people, specifically, what are ways to do that?
Well, we have a lot of people that are out of work. We have businesses that are being affected, continue to be affected, especially small businesses. And we need to make sure that we help those people as much as we possibly can keep moving forward. Part of the problem is government has created a lot of these issues, and so it's up to the government to come in and to fix some of these things.
All right, Charlie, your thoughts on states potentially getting some of that money and what they should do with it?
Well, states definitely need to get some of that money, and so do local governments. I know that Representative Malloy disagrees with that, but the reality is that there are a lot of services for individuals that directly impact people that are funded through state and local governments. And so that's why we really need to have the state and local government need to be included in this stimulus package, because a lot of that money then goes through. I mean, I look at the providers, the disability service providers that I represent. That's an example. They are funded entirely through the state. So without having that kind of state funding, those businesses would be neglected.
Representative Malloy, would you like to see another round of direct payments made to the American people?
Again, I don't know what is the best form to take, but I think whatever we can do to help the people provide for their families, provide for themselves, and get people back to work is the best way to approach it. We need to just make sure we can get our society back to where it is, get the people working, make sure that they have access to the health care that they need, especially as the virus rolls out. We want to make sure that that is done in a really good way, and that we.
And you mean are you referring to the vaccine?
Yes.
The vaccine.
What did I say?
The virus.
The virus, no, not the virus, the vaccine.
All right, I just wanted to make
We have a bad virus, we need the vaccine.
Exactly. Okay, yeah, that's a whole new topic in and of itself. Maybe we'll get into that some other time, but I want to move on to the election, the presidential election. Charlie, you just alluded to it. It continues to go on to this day. But we started to see the president take aim at 2 Republican governors, one in Arizona, one in Georgia during the week. And those 2 governors who did support him in the election, by the way, are pushing back. What do you make of the latest on what we're seeing there?
Well, I think that this is typical from what we've seen from Donald Trump over 4 years. You are either with Donald Trump or you're against Donald Trump. He's now, he now has issues with the Attorney General, who, was doing a lot of his bidding earlier this year. Anytime you disagree with Donald Trump, he is going to come after you. That's what the Republican Party is starting to realize right now, and especially some of the Republican governors. You look at the press conference that was conducted earlier last week by a state elections official in Georgia who really went after the president. This isn't a Democrat, or a Republican, I mean, who voted and supported the president, who the president is coming after. The president only cares about the president. That is the problem right now, and I think that until the Republican elected officials can actually continue to stand up, it shouldn't be a surprise that he's going to come after them.
Representative Malloy, is that good for the party when you see that kind of internal fighting?
Well, I don't like to see any kind of fighting, or internal or otherwise, but I think you have some governors that are under a lot of pressure. They're under a lot of pressure to get it right. We have a president of the United States who represents the people of the United States. Half the people in this country voted for him, and he feels
less than half.
He feels well, that's what we're deciding, right? And he feels a responsibility to get it right, and that's what he's always done.
But why would these Republican governors not have that same sense of responsibility when they supported the president to begin with?
I'm not saying that they do or don't. I would assume that they have that same sense of responsibility. I think what's going on with the president and his campaign team to make sure that the vote is done properly. He has every right in the world to make sure it is done properly. And I think there's a lot of frustration on everybody's part to make sure that it is done well.
But that's, Representative, that's one of the things both these governors came out and said. It was done properly in our state. We find no evidence of widespread fraud, and that's part of their pushback.
Yeah, and I think it's all part of the process, okay? It's really all part of the process. I think it needs to play itself out. I think when the time comes, the president, he will concede when he feels like everything has been done properly. If there are some things that come out, it changes the vote. I would hope Biden would do the same thing.
Okay, Charlie, you mentioned that press conference from the Georgia Secretary of State's office.
Yes.
They were concerned about some of their workers getting death threats.
And they should be.
Is it dangerous what we're seeing play out?
Absolutely, and it is imperative for, or critical for elected officials to stand up and try to bring some common sense back to the situation that's taking place. You don't stoke when emotions are as high as they are. You shouldn't see elected officials continue to push false narratives, to push issues that are really putting regular people's lives in danger. All right, that's what we're seeing in Georgia.
Representative, we have about 30 seconds left. I'll give you the final word. Is the rhetoric dangerous?
I think any kind of rhetoric that promotes violence is dangerous. And I think that there are many, many examples of people at all levels who are saying, not condoning it. They're encouraging people not to make threats or to be violent. And I think it's not just an issue here with this election, but it's been an issue throughout this year with a lot of different things. And I think if it applies to one, it applies to all.
All right, gentlemen, we're going to have to end it on that note. Appreciate your time. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Stay with us. We'll be right back with more Inside Utah Politics right after the break. We leave you now with a look at what's on the radar in the world of politics. Inauguration Day for the state of Utah is Monday, January 4th. The general legislative session begins a few weeks after that. Opening day is Tuesday, January 19th. And the presidential inauguration is the following day, Wednesday, the 20th. Make sure to connect with me on social media. I'd like to know what you think of this show and other issues that are important to you. You can email me at InsideUtahPolitics@abc4.com. You can also follow me on Twitter and Facebook. Just log on and search Glenn Mills ABC4. Thanks so much for making us part of your day. We hope to see you again next week as we go inside Utah politics.